Good day. Thanks for taking the time to look a little bit into text complexity to complete our conversation that we started when we introduced Curriculum Companion. You'll see that text complexity is a part of every content area, and that's why we are fortunate enough to have all teachers on board with understanding what it means to teach complex text, to choose appropriate complex text, and move students really toward college and career readiness. As you think today about text complexity in your content area, consider the type of text that you use and how you currently determine to use those texts, how you shop for new texts, and perhaps how you can benefit from evaluating current and future texts to benefit learners all around in your content area. The Common Core standards do hinge on that students encounter appropriately complex texts at each grade level in order to develop that mature knowledge, skills, language, and actually the success that we need in school and shortly thereafter. So you're probably asking, why does text complexity matter to me? But truthfully, if you think about how the gap widens from what students have to what is demanded of them after high school, whether it's the workforce or it's graduation, I believe that this quote from Lexile.com on Common Core and text complexity really drives home the fact that these K-12 texts and reading tasks, meaning what we ask kids to do with literature or informational text, results in a significant gap that the complexity of texts and the tasks that we asked of them have decreased as indicated in the quotation itself. So you're thinking about, as a teacher, what's the task ahead and what teachers need to know. The teacher's task ahead is to know that students are faced with increasingly longer and more complex texts in terms of vocabulary, whether it's content-based or niche-specific, sentence structure, and of course text organization. I can't help but think about the type of text that our students will encounter or do encounter that perhaps we had not introduced to them in school. So what will they see in the workplace? What would they see in their education beyond high school that looks different than what we presented them so far? So we are mounted with a task ahead of us as instructors, as educators, to guide students to navigating appropriate text. So what teachers need to know, they need to know their students as readers. No matter the age of the child, you need to know what that student is capable of, what that student experiences as a reader. There's all sorts of inventories you can do about who they are as a reader, what they read, and how they read, but I believe that most K-12 teachers, in getting to know their students, can at least gauge a foundational understanding of where a student's reading ability is by just experiencing a text with them and promoting conversation. Teachers also need to know the complexity of the text that they're using. That's what we're here to talk about today. And finally, the nature of the tasks. So not only having the text in front of you, but then extending it and talking about, what are we going to do with that? How are we going to have a conversation? What are we going to write? What are we going to have students do with that information? Because best practice determines that it's important to not only have kids read a text that is appropriate and content specific, but also have them do something with it. Readers always have a mission. Text complexity, especially within standard number 10, there's a specific note on the range and content of student reading. Anchor Standard 10 reads that students need to read and comprehend complex text and information text independently and proficiently. That's a big leap for some of our students. Specifically in the 6th grade standard, if you look at it, you can evaluate. So, to build that foundation for college and career readiness, students must widely and deeply from among a broad range of high-quality, increasingly challenging literary and informational texts. It's a mouthful, but it's our reality with Common Core state standards. Through extensive reading of stories, dramas, poems, and myths from diverse cultures, different time periods, students can gain that literary and cultural knowledge as well as a familiarity with various text structures and elements. Again, a mouthful, but it's what we expect of our students. By reading texts in history or social studies, science, and other disciplines, students build that foundation of knowledge in these fields That will also give them then the background to be better readers in all content areas. Students can only gain this foundation when the curriculum is intentionally, meaning teachers choose and coherently structured to develop that rich content and knowledge within and across grade levels. So it demands intense collaboration and truly like a pickiness associated with the text that we choose at particular grade levels. Students also acquire habits of reading independently and closely, which are essential to their future success. So our guiding questions for today, I hope to answer these with you today to be able to talk about them, and perhaps you can answer them since we can't have a conversation together. But what is text complexity? What do the Common Core State Standards mean? If you can turn to your partner and give it a one breath shot at explaining, you're probably right there. What is a text complexity band? We're going to have a couple views of this today. There's a handout that should be able to guide you. And finally, how do we ensure that texts our students are reading in the appropriate text complexity band? We're gonna learn measurement today. So hopefully we can satisfy some of the less linguistic folks in the room by looking at the actual texts that we use. So text complexity is defined by three measures. If you look, there are three legs on the triangle. We have our quantitative measures. That's our number. That's our readability score. Typically, we see that as Lexile. If you you use MAP and see a written, the Lexile is associated with it, or your library's Lexile books. Qualitative measures, and I love this one because qualitative measures demand a human to interact with the text to make that judgment. And finally, we have our reader and task considerations. This connects exactly back to the Common Core because we're thinking about the teacher knowledge of the students and what you want the child to do with that given text. If you need a more creative way to look at these, I find this one quite tasteful and delicious looking to think about text complexity. It's just another way to talk about the three different components. I prefer, of course, the let's go with qualitative because it's a big squishy marshmallow. And I think that's one of the most valuable pieces actually that educators can look at text for. Text complexity bands exist when we're talking about quantitative, and it's by grade level. So you notice that there's just two measurements here. The first being Lexile and the second ATOS. That's accelerated reader. Both of these have the ability, search type features on there to determine the level of the book, as we would call it. However, those suggested ranges have now been placed and paired with grade bands. So you see the K1 band has a Lexile of 100 to 500. 2-3 is 450 to 790, and so on. Same goes with the ATOS book level range as well. And then we'll get into what it looks like to determine this. In my opinion, it's easy to look at the quantitative measures because the computer does it for you. It's something, truthfully, that a computer can generate as well. So where do we find texts in the appropriate text complexity band? We could go straight to Appendix B, and you could teach straight out of that. You really could. Or, which require, well, I guess it helps personalize our instruction. Use those resources available, and these are all available to you today, and you will be able to use them, aren't you lucky, to determine the text complexity materials on our own. And so we'll be using rubrics and forms and, hey, collaborative discussion with that person right next to you. It is truthfully a four-step process, though there are three legs of the triangle, to determine that text complexity. The first step is to determine that quantitative measurement. It's the numbers. It's the easiest because it's right there that a computer can produce an answer for you. Analyze the qualitative measures of the text. So notice that determine says, boom, there it is, that's a number. Number two requires you to analyze, to think about it, have a conversation, and truthfully, have a productive argument with another person about the measures that make up the qualitative features of a particular text. The last one is the reader and task. So you have to reflect upon the reader and the task considerations. This may change from year to year only because your students do change from year to year. However, developmentally, you're going to be aware of the type of student who walks into your room or the type of student who is lucky enough to be in a particular course. Remember that it is is collaborative. It can be applied to both literary and informational texts. The fourth, the fourth step, the final step, is really the paperwork end of it. It's recommending a placement in the appropriate text complexity band. It's probably assumed by a number of people that by doing 1, 2, and 3, you will produce 4. However, the fourth does demand that you fill out the paperwork and make a claim and argument. And we could talk about perhaps why you would want to A, do it collaboratively, and B, why you would want some written product to demonstrate why this text is appropriate for that grade level during a given time. So let's dive in and talk about it. Quantitative measures. It's going to measure things like word length, frequency, word difficulty, sentence length, and text cohesion. Like I said, all of these things are something a computer can do for you. If you really want to take the time to count and calculate, you are so welcome to. However, if this process isn't time consuming enough to look at a particular text, this is really an easy way to expedite that process. So we're going to look at 2 different measurements. The first is the Lexile text measures. If you're familiar with Lexile, I usually used it with 7th graders when we were determining their book levels. That was my go-to for determining it. This step of measuring is truly accessible because it produces numbers that both students and teachers are familiar with, Lexile and reading level. Both of these sites, ATOS and Lexile text measures, are both free and produce immediate feedback about levels. If you've used Lexile.com, we're going to show you what it looks like here and then give you a screenshot of what the ATOS book levels looks like as well. Let's imagine that we want to see where a text falls in the quantitative measures leg of the text complexity triangle. Using the Lexile text or the ATOS book level both, let's go ahead and think about To Kill a Mockingbird. We're going to go right into Lexile.com, and in Find a Book, it is pretty darn simple. There's a look up the book. It's a typical search engine type feature in which you insert the title of the text, and as you guess, press that search button. It should then produce something that reflects this. You'll notice on there that you need to assure that the title matches exactly what you're looking at. Perhaps it's not on there and you'll use a different measurement outside of Lexile if it's more obscure and not something that is perhaps published on Lexile's radar. To Kill a Mockingbird, you'll also know that it produces that number up there, the 870L. The L stands for Lexile, of course, and the number of the Lexile is 870. Let me see here. So it also indicates that you can measure a text. You can get a text measure for texts that aren't in the database. You can use that analyzer itself, and I think ATOS has something real similar to that. Registration is free, and then you simply type in the pieces of the text. Notice it says accommodates text up to 1,000 words in length. That you can upgrade if you want to the professional by requesting access. But if you have something that's like a snippet or a news article or something like that you want to analyze, there is an option out there for you. If you want to research deeper into Lexile measures or determine ways to talk about it as a team, you are welcome to use any of these resources provided. The next slide that you see is the ATOS book level, and so you notice that it has an ATOS. You have the option to type in the text down below there at determine ATOS levels for the book, or you could determine the book by typing, if you have it as a text file, so copy and pasting, that you can do it that way. ATOS again is a real easy tool to use, just like Lexile.com. To get to the meat of it all, Lexile measure produces a Lexile of 870, and the ATOS book level then turns out to be 5.6. I typically think of the 5.6 as grade level, so in the 5th grade and near the end of the 5th grade. So we're going to then look at these two numbers and say, hey, which one of this does it fall into? Okay, in which of the text complexities band does this novel fall in particular? You'll have this handout as well, the quantitative measures ranges for text complexity band. There's the band there for you. and it falls into the 770 because we're at 870, right? So it falls into something. Now, this may scare you. It says text complexity grade band of 4th and 5th grade. This makes me wonder. Remember that the quantitative measure is only of the first of the 3 legs in the triangle itself. So though it's backed by numbers, it is just one component of measuring text complexity. Take that fixed number into consideration as you're measuring the next leg, qualitative. And we will make that final recommendation on a given form.